Hi, welcome to the Gemara Anya Dalet Amid Aleph. We're starting 13 lines from the top. The first words on the line are Tanu Rabbanan. So Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Breita, where literally our rabbis taught, Arba'im v'shmona nevi'im v'sheva neviot nitnabu lahem liYisrael. There were 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses who prophesied for Israel. V'lo patchu v'lo hotiru al ma shekatuv b'Torah, and they didn't diminish from or add to what was written in the Torah, chutz mi Mikra Megillah, except for Mikra Megillah. That was the only mitzvah that they added. Rashi comments on this over here. Chutz mi Mikra Megillah. Is it really true that Mikra Megillah was the only thing that was added afterwards, added by the Nevi'im afterwards? So Rashi says, V'im tomar ner Chanukah. If you would say, well, what about Hanukkah candles? That was also added afterwards. Kfar pasku Nevi'im. At that point, the Nevi'im were already no longer around. There were no Nevi'im. So that was a mitzvah that was added later, but not by prophets. Aval b'mei Mordechai hayu Chagai, Zachariah, u'Malachi. But in the days of Mordechai, Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi were still around, so that counts as the single mitzvah that was added by Nevi'im later on, meaning after the Torah. So Mikra Megillah is the only mitzvah that was added. My drush, what did they learn this from? Meaning, what did they learn out from in order to feel that they were allowed to add a mitzvah? That's a pretty big deal, to add a mitzvah. So why did they feel they were allowed? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Chia bar Avin says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Uma me'avdut l'cheirut amrinan shira, mimita l'chayim l'kol sheken. Just as going from servitude to freedom, they said a song, from death to life, how much more so, right? Isn't it even more true? So Rashi explains here, Me'avdut l'cheirut b'yitziat Mitzrayim amru shira al hayam. There was famously a song involved in leaving Egypt, and that was just Avdut l'cheirut, that was just going out to freedom. So if you say a shira on going from Avdut to cheirut, so how much more so that you should say a shira on going from death to life, meaning the salvation that happens in the time of the Megillah. Interestingly, this is not a pasuk that they learned from, but Rabbi Chia bar Avin is saying in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha that this is how the Nevi'im knew that it was appropriate to institute the reading of Megillah, because it's like singing a song. And we know that a song is appropriate, learning out a kol sheken from Yitziat Mitzrayim. Ihachi, if so, if it's really true that this was the kind of kal v'chomer argument that was used, halal nami nema. Then we should also say halal, right? If the whole drasha about reading Megillah comes from the idea that we said a song when we left Egypt, so how much more so should we say a song when we are being saved from Haman? So then we should also say halal, right? It's worthy of saying halal, because we say halal in Yetziat Mitzrayim. And Rashi adds, halal nami nema shihi shira, right? Halal is a form of song. So if the whole argument is about singing a song, then if we sang a song for leaving Egypt, we should sing a song for being rescued from Haman. Lefi she'ein omrim halal al nesh b'chutz al aretz. So the Gemara answers, because we don't say halal on a miracle that happened outside of Israel. So that's why they just instituted Megillah reading. They didn't institute halal. But there's a problem. Yitziat Mitzrayim denesh b'chutz haaretz. Right? Yitziat Mitzrayim was actually a miracle that happened outside of the land of Israel. Heichi amrinan shira. So how is it that we say a song? Right? How do we recite a song on it if it happened outside the land of Israel? Get a Tanya. As we learned in the Breita, Ad shelo nichnasu Yisrael la'aretz huchshuru kol haaretzot lamar shira. Until the time that the Jews entered the land of Israel, all lands were kosher, as it were. All lands were proper for singing a song. Meaning, then you could institute halal, you could institute a song for a miracle that happened in any place. Mishenichnasu Yisrael haaretz lo huchshuru kol haaretzot lamar shira. But once the Jews entered the land of Israel for the first time, that was it. You could no longer say shira over a miracle that happened anywhere else. So that explains why we do say halal for Yetziat Mitzrayim, because that miracle happened outside of Israel, but before the Jews had ever entered Israel. And we don't say Hallel for the miracle of Purim because that happened outside of Israel after the Jews had already entered the land of Israel. Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman says, Kriyata zo Haleila. Its reading is its Hallel, or its song. Reading the Megillah, that's what Kriyata refers to here, counts as Hallel. So it's not that they didn't institute Hallel for Purim, it's that they did institute a form of Hallel as a commemoration of the miracle of being saved from Haman, but Megillah reading is that Hallel. Rava Amar, Rava says, Bishlam Hatam, it makes sense there, or it works there. In Tehillim it says, Hallelu Avdei Hashem. That's a pasuk, right? A pasuk from Hallel. The servants of God give praise. V'lo Avdei Paro, and not the servants of Pharaoh. Meaning it makes sense that we say Hallel, and we say these words in Hallel because we're giving thanks for being God's servants and not the servants of Pharaoh. Elahacha, Hallelu Avdei Hashem v'lo Avdei Achashverosh. Could we say Hallelu Avdei Hashem and not Avdei Achashverosh and not servants of Achashverosh? Akate Avdei Achashverosh anan. We are still, Akate means adayin, still. We're still the servants of Achashverosh. Right? Meaning, Rava is reflecting the fact that there's not as great a transition after the Purim story as there is after Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Jews were in Persia, and as far as Rava is concerned, they're still in Persia. They're still living under Persian Empire. Not that much has changed. They were saved from death, but it wasn't a complete redemption. And so that would be his explanation for why we don't say Hallel on Purim. Ben l'Rava, ben l'Ravi Nachman, kasha. Whether for Rava or for Rabbi Nachman, there's a problem. Here's the problem. V'ha'tanya, but didn't we learn in the Braita? Mishenichnasu la'aretz lo huksharu kol ha'aretzot lamar shira. Didn't we just say in a Braita that once they entered into the land of Israel, the other miracles that happened in other places weren't counted for Hallel purposes, right? Literally, the other lands were not appropriate for saying song. So the Purim miracle should be automatically disqualified. These other reasons shouldn't matter. Here's the response. Kivan shigalu chazru lehechsheran harishon. Once they were exiled, those lands returned to their former state of appropriateness. So, meaning for Rav Nachman, you would just say that that once they were exiled, other lands also became appropriate places for miracles over which you would say Shira, and so that's why they need their reasons for why we don't say Hallel on Purim. And we're going back to an earlier topic, the two Leica. And are there not more, or more there aren't? Meaning going back to this idea that there are 48 Nevi'im and 7 Nevi'ot. The Gemara wants to know, are there really not any more? And your first homework question, the Gemara is about to focus on the Nevi'im, and later it's going to talk about the Nevi'ot. But your first question for homework, without looking ahead in the Gemara and without using Google, is how many of the 7 Nevi'ot do you think you can name? So create a list. It's okay if you don't get to 7, but see how many Nevi'ot you can name who you think make the list of 7. So V'tu Leika, are there really not anymore? The Haktiv, but doesn't it say in Shmuel, Vayhi ish echad min haramatayim tzofim. There was a man from Ramatayim Tzofim, so the very beginning of Shmuel, and it's, I'll give you the whole pasuk here. Right, this is about Elkanah, Vayhi Shechad min Haramatayim Tzofim, Mehar Ephraim, Ushmo Elkanah ben Yerocham ben Elihu, ben Tochu ben Suf Ephrati. So it just describes his lineage, but it does say he was from this place called Ramatayim Tzofim. And the Gemara gives the following drasha on that verse: Echad mima'atayim tzofim shenitnabu lahem liYisrael. Wasn't he actually one of 200 prophets, seers? We've had this word tzofim before, but tzofim means prophets, who prophesied for Israel. So the Gemara responds, Mehava tuvahavu. Yep, there were a lot of them, in fact. Kidatanya, as we learned in Braita, Harbe nevi'im amdu lahem liYisrael. Kiflayim kiyotze Mitzrayim. there were lots and lots of Nevi'im that literally stood up for Israel. That became prophets for the Jews. Twice as many as the number of people who went out of Egypt. Ella nivuah shehutzricha ledorot nichteva v'shelo hutzricha lo nichteva. But nivuot that were necessary for the generations, necessary to be preserved for all times, were written down, and those that were not preserved. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, Adam haba mishtei ramot shetzofot zo et zo. So this is just so we seem to have resolved the Navi issue. We've just said that yes, there were a lot of them, but that smaller number refers to the number whose Nevuah was preserved. And actually, Rashi here has a long comment. We won't read all of it, but he just says Nevuah shehutzracha ledorot. The idea of a prophecy that was necessary for the generations, Lilmod tshuva o hara'ah, to teach about tshuva or to teach instructions, right, Torah, and all of these 48 were necessary. And then he gives you from the Baal Halachot Gdolot, from a Gaonic source, he gives you the list of who those 48 were and discusses them at some length. So we're going on. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar, Adam haba mishtei ramot shetzofot zo et zo. So explaining a different dresha for Haramatayim Sofim, someone who was from two hills, two high places, that looked at one another. So it's just a description there of where he was from, not so much, not really about whether or not he was a Navi. Rabbi Chanin Amar, so Rabbi Chanin gives a different answer. He says, we skipped to the top. Rabbi Chanin Amar, Adam haba mibnei Adam, she'omdin berumo shel olam. A person who was descended from people who were standing literally at the top of the world or at the heights of the world. Uman ninhu, and who were these people? Bnei Korach. These people are Bnei Korach, the sons of Korach, Dichtiv, as it says. Ubnei Korach lo metu. The sons of Korach didn't die. That's a pasuk in Bamidbar. Tana mishum Rabbeinu, makom nitbatzar lahem begehinom ve'amdu alav. So how does this work that the sons of Korach were standing at the top of the world? So we have a teaching in the name of Rabbeinu, who's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, that a place was sort of made for them in Gehinom, which was, so when the earth opened its mouth to swallow Korach, there was like a high place that was made for the sons of Korach so they didn't fall through. So they were standing sort of at the top of the world because they were being held up while Korach was being sucked in. So in that sense, they were people who stood at the top of the world. A place was, heaped up for them in Gehinom, and they stood on it, and that's how they were saved. So again, that's just a dresha about. That's just a dresha about how we get a different version of what Ish Echad min Haramatayim Sofim means. Your other questions for homework. So first of all, please list the different reasons for saying that are given by the different rabbis here as to why we don't say Hallel on Purim. There are several reasons given here, so please list those reasons. And the third question is more of a thought question. How is Hallel like Megillah? For the opinion that says Kriyat Zohelela, that reading Megillah replaces Hallel. What do you think about that? How are those the same? How are those different? How might Megillah reading replace Hallel? Okay, we'll stop there.